Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. This is another Take Back Our Community Thursday conversation where we hear from the organizations, the activists, and the other people who are working to make our community better and safer. We are hearing a lot about gun violence in our community. Just today, 4 people were shot in Southeast DC. Last Saturday in Pennsylvania, there was the attempted assassination of former President Trump, where 1 person was killed and 2 others wounded. But what we don't hear as much about is gun safety and legal, responsible firearms ownership in our community. Well, that's the focus of tonight's discussion. My guest is Kiana Roberts. She is a licensed, qualified firearms instructor. Kiana, thank you so much for joining this really important conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Harold. I tell you, you need to put more emphasis on the word important, because it is very much an important conversation that we need to have more often in our community. And unfortunately, gun safety and responsible gun ownership, that conversation is being overshadowed by gun violence conversations.
Exactly.
And it's understandable, because that's all we're seeing around us, which is what led me to start my business in firearms instruction and training, because there was so much gun violence going on around us, and it was creating such a negative stigma, especially in the Black community, and with females. You know, you have so many women who are afraid of guns because of the negative stigma, the media's coverage of gun violence, and all they think is that guns hurt people, and guns do kill people, but people kill people with guns, actually. And so that's what led me to starting my business, because I wanted to try to dispel the negative stigma, and promote more harmony, not even harmony, but more awareness, and make people more comfortable with owning guns, using guns, handling guns, and using them safely. And so when you're using them safely, when you know how to properly handle them, then you become more comfortable with them.
And full disclosure, in 2022, I actually took your gun safety class, and it was very good, and I've been wanting to have you on this program for quite some time, because it is critical that our community and our listeners at WHUR really understand that often when we hear in the town square discussions about the Second Amendment, that we don't often hear about it in our community as it relates to Black people. The Second Amendment, just like the First Amendment and all of the amendments, it is for everyone.
Everyone.
It is just not for the people who do not look like us. And gun ownership is a choice. And it is something that you do not necessarily have to do. But for those people who decide that it is something that they want to do, they need to understand how firearms, handguns, rifles, long guns, how they work, so that they can be handled safely and securely.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So first of all, it's our right to bear arms, which is the Second Amendment, right? It gives us the right to bear arms if we choose to bear arms. And unfortunately, in our community, there's more talk about it now and in the recent years, but in prior years, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. You ask any, person in let's say I'm in Baltimore, let's say you go in West Baltimore, and you ask, what is the Second Amendment? People wouldn't even be able to tell you what that is. But you go into other communities and you ask that question, and you would know. I remember there was a time when I used to go to the firearms range, and there were very few people of color in there. But what I did see was a lot of people of I would say, like white people. I would see a lot of white folks in there with their children, young children, I mean, as young as 5, teaching them how to shoot, teaching them proper handling of firearms and safety, right? And so I realized that we need to even the playing field, you know. Unfortunately, and I hate to put it this way, but, you know, I feel like there's going to be a significant shift with the attempted assassination of our former president and with gun ownership, right? And we realize that certain demographics get riled up.
Yeah.
He has the ability to rile up certain demographics. And again, leveling the playing field, ensuring that we have equal access, equal opportunity, and equal knowledge, right? And so again, teaching proper handling, proper training. One of the other reasons why I started my business is because I would go to the range to practice on my own. I have, in full disclosure, I have over 20 years of federal law enforcement experience working in
Mhm.
federal law enforcement, and I would go to the range to practice on my own, to the firearms range to practice on my own, and I saw so many people mishandling firearms, doing unsafe behaviors, unsafe. We call it lasering or flagging, where you know you're turning the barrel toward people or on yourself,
Oh
which
my
could really
God.
hurt somebody, right? It's very unsafe. And you know from my class,
Yes,
that's very
exactly.
unsafe practices. And so I found myself doing impromptu training at the range, saying, "Hey, excuse me, let me help you." They're exchanging the magazines and not properly doing so. And you're supposed to turn the firearm muzzle pointed down range, bring it close quarters to exchange it. They're doing all of these wild and crazy things. And so I found myself doing impromptu training at the range because people didn't know how to safely handle firearms. And that can not only will it prevent you from protecting yourself, but it can also cause you to hurt yourself. And if you're a gun owner and you don't know how to properly handle your firearm, then it can be used against you when you need it to help you. So
Mhm.
that's what prompted me to get into my business, and or one of the reasons. And I have found it very rewarding working with people, educating them. My slogan is empowered, prepared, and protected, because I believe in empowering people to have the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to properly use a handgun to protect themselves and their family. I believe in preparing them by giving them the training that they need so that they can do so. And then I want them to be protected, and I want them to protect themselves and their families, and teaching them and educating them on the laws. What does the law in this state say? There's some firearms instructors out there that tout that, oh, I can license for 26 states, or I can license for so on and so forth. Well, in giving somebody a license for 26 states, you need to teach them the laws in those 26 states, because they
Yeah.
can find
Yeah.
themselves hung up and in more trouble than it's worth. So just understanding all of that, and really trying to teach my students, because I'm passionate about this work. It's not about, well, let me say this. A couple of years ago, when the Supreme Court made the decision that New York would go from a may issue state to a shall issue state, meaning
Mhm.
there was laws on the books that said New York, Maryland, and I think there was 5 other states that they had the right to determine whether or not they would issue a firearm license to the residents of their states. And the Supreme Court deemed that that was unconstitutional, because it is our Second Amendment right to bear arms. And so you can't prevent people from doing so as long as they meet certain criteria. And so Maryland became a shall issue state. And when that happened, it really opened up the floodgates.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to get a gun, and everybody wanted to be an instructor,
Yeah.
right? And it became almost like a money grab, if you will. I was training people, and they said, "Oh, well, your class is too expensive." Somebody said that they can license me with a concealed carry in 26 states for $100.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a 16-hour class, and they're doing it for $100. That's less than minimum wage working at, let's say, McDonald's.
Yeah. So let's talk
Yeah.
about your class, and let's talk about some of the basics, because certainly there are some people who are listening who have never owned a gun before, or like myself, have considered it, and other than a small handgun that was that I received, or I have after the passing of my father. And I've been talking about this for years and years and years and years, and still have not done it. So let's talk about your basic handgun safety class. When somebody comes to your class, what's the first thing that they hear from you?
So before they even come to my class, I kind of quasi interview people over the telephone. When they say that they're interested, everybody that reaches out to me for a class, whether they find out about my training through Maryland State Police website, referred from a friend or what have you, I contact them so I can physically have a conversation with them, because I want to kind of vet them to get an idea of their mindset. Right? Because responsible gun ownership is 99% mindset, 1% technique. 99% mindset. You have to have the mindset to say, one, I'm going to be responsible with this thing, right? Two, I'm prepared to use it if I have to. And more importantly, I know when I should not use it, right? Because that's what gets a lot of people into trouble. They're pulling it out when they shouldn't pull it out. And so I start to vet them over the phone to get an idea of mindset. Tell me a little bit about your background. Why are you interested in owning a firearm, so on and so forth. And I can kind of hear buzzwords, right? And there are people that I've turned down because I just
Really?
don't, yeah, they're not a good fit, because I question their rationale, their reason for wanting to own a firearm, and I don't want to be the one to license them.
What kind of reasons might red flag you as an instructor?
Well, if somebody has had a traumatic experience and they sound vindictive, right? So if there is a person that has been maybe robbed at gunpoint, or been in an abusive relationship, and they sound vindictive, it's not just for, protecting myself, but more so they're saying things that like make me think that if they were to encounter that individual, they'd be more likely to shoot them without a just cause to do so. And so, excuse me. And so because of that, then I will question, and I'm never going to offend somebody and say, I think that you're going, I just tell them, you know what? I don't know if you're a right fit for my class. Maybe I'll say something like, I don't have any spots open right now, or what have you. There's other people that I turn down because I don't think that they're going to practice enough. I've had people come to me. So let me back up. First step for me is the basic handgun qualification license. That is the license that Maryland State gives you to purchase and own a firearm. You need a Maryland
We hear that
HQL,
Yeah.
the handgun qualification license, right? That is the first step. So for me, and then the second license is the concealed carry weapons permit, which gives you the right to carry a firearm on your person out in public. Right. So HQL, you can purchase it and you can have it in your home. Concealed carry is you can carry it out in public on your person, but it has to be concealed. Right. So it's not an open carry where people can just see it. It has to be concealed. There are some instructors who provide both licenses in one class, because the information that is offered in concealed carry is the same information that you need for HQL. I don't do that, because I don't feel like it's enough training for an individual to go out and put a gun on every single day and walk around with it. So for me, for my class, I tell everybody, you have to take the HQL, and we go through, it's a 4-hour class. And then it is a live fire demonstration. What does that mean? You get 4 hours instruction on Maryland law, how to properly handle a firearm, safety of a firearm, how to store a firearm, how to transport a firearm, because you can only transport, not carry. And then I take you out on the range and you have to demonstrate your ability to shoot a firearm and effectively hit a target.
Hold that point, because I've got to take a really quick break. But when we come back, we will continue this conversation on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next on WHUR. This conversation will continue on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. This is another Take Back Our Community Thursday conversation where we discuss issues that make our community better and safer. And tonight we're talking about gun safety and legal, responsible firearms ownership in our community. My guest is Kiana Roberts. She is a licensed, qualified firearms instructor. Kiana, before the break, you were talking about the different kinds of licenses that one can receive after, of course, taking your class. So once someone comes to your class, uh, talk to me about the kinds of things that you let them know right off the jump, the kinds of conversations that you have with them even before they have the non-lethal training pistols that are used in your class.
Right. So as I was alluding to a little bit earlier, the first thing is mindset. So I talk to people about mindset. So once they get to my class, we then continue that conversation. I ask them, why are they here? Tell me a little bit about your background. How much experience do you have with firearms? Whether it's physically handling one, being involved in a traumatic incident, knowing somebody that was perhaps maybe killed
Mm.
by the use of a firearm. So we talk about those things. And then I start sharing with them about mindset. I tell them why. I tell them about me, my why. Why am I in this business? Why am I teaching? And it's really about passion and education, right? And then we talk about what it means to be a responsible firearms owner. And so what does that mean? It means knowing when to shoot and when not to shoot, knowing why you can, understanding the laws, right, of the state that you're carrying in, whether you're owning just a HQL, um, owner, permit license holder, or whether you are a concealed carry permit holder. Understanding that, what does that mean? And then we get into the safety of it. Especially at home, it is so important to properly secure your firearm in your home, whether you live alone or whether you have people that live in your home with you, because you don't want your firearm to get into the hands of somebody that it shouldn't, right?
What does
So
that mean, properly securing it in your home? Give me an example of that.
well, Maryland state law requires that your firearm should be locked in a locked box, emptied. It should be empty, so no magazine, no ammunition inside of the firearm, and the ammunition should be secured outside of the place where your firearm is being secured. So again, a locked box, safe, some kind of locked container, and put out of sight so people can't easily get to it. So, for example, if you have children that live in your home, you don't want your children to get to it. If you have somebody that has a mental disability, you don't want them to be able to get to it. Now, the other thing that I teach in my training is that the individuals that live with you, if they're able to fire a firearm, you should teach them how to use it, how to handle it, and proper use of it. For example, my children, they're in my home. So I have taught them how to shoot a firearm. We have what we call a home safety procedures, where if there was an intruder, what do my children do? It's called a
How
home
old
safety.
are your children?
My children are 13 and 16, and I taught them how to shoot. We started talking about guns very early on because, as I said, I'm in law enforcement and I carried a gun their entire lives. So
They
we
would
started.
see them. They would
They've
see it.
seen it. They've seen
Yeah.
it. I come home from work, they run up to me to hug me, mommy. When they were little, they'd hit their face on, my holster or something. So,
Mm.
so they've always learned. I've always taught them. I've always taught them about firearms and what it means. But when I thought that they were able to properly handle it, I took them to the range. And before I took them to the range, I showed them at home with an empty firearm. I showed them the parts, the mechanisms, the nomenclature of it, how they work, safety. What does that mean? Don't touch it, because if you pull the trigger, it will go off, right? All those things. And then I took them to the range and I showed them, because they needed to know in real time what it sounds like, because it is scary.
Mm. Yeah.
You've gone, you hear that boom and it makes you jump. I've been doing this for over 20 years and I still jump
Yeah.
when I hear it. So I took them to the range and I taught them how to shoot. My oldest daughter, she's a great shot. My youngest daughter, she'll eliminate a threat if necessary. But I felt like it was important. And so the other thing that I teach people is, if you're going to be a responsible firearms user or carrier, owner, you need to train. You absolutely have to. You can't come to my class, take my class, and then think that you're going to be able to save your life. Perhaps I pray that you will. If, if something were to happen, I pray that you are able to do it. But if you're not properly training, it's a perishable skill. You will lose their ability to aim, to shoot accurately, and all of those things. And then also, you become fearful again. So you
Yeah.
have to build that conditioning, right, to be prepared. And all of us, even in law enforcement, we get that tunnel vision that happens, and there's things that go through your body when you're holding a firearm, when you're shooting a firearm. And if you're involved in a traumatic incident, your body goes through certain responses, right, that just happen. And so there's the fight or flight, there's signals that go to your brain. You get tunnel vision. Sometimes you think you hear things that you didn't hear, you think you see things that you didn't see, and so on and so forth. And so learning how to combat that, right, so that you can stay focused if you are involved in a traumatic incident and you have to pull your firearm out and use it.
One of the things that I do remember when I took your class, and I do remember a lot, and I still have my notes.
Good.
But one of the things that really stuck with me was, and you were, and again, I repeat, your class was really, really good. It's comfortable, it's relaxed, but it's very serious. And one of the things that you said was, make sure that wherever that your gun is always pointed
in a safe direction.
In the direction where it can do the least harm.
Yes, in a safe direction.
In a safe direction, because it's not just what's immediately in front of you, but what may be in front of the barrel of that gun.
And beyond. So
beyond.
You're talking about our safety rules, right? So
Yes.
Again, so one of the things that we open with in my class is the 4 safety rules. So for the first thing I do is I identify a safe direction in my classroom, because we are handling firearms, and even what we call dummy firearms that
Right,
are
the non-lethal,
plastic,
right.
right? Non-lethal, not usable firearms, right? Whether they're plastic, rubber, whatever it is. I still want you to have the practice of pointing the firearm in a safe direction. So we never laser ourselves. We never point at anybody. But I identify what is a safe direction. And I tell my students, in your home, the first thing you want to do is identify what is a safe direction. That is a direction that if the firearm was to go off and a bullet was to dislodge, where would it go? It would not go through the drywall into your daughter's bedroom, or through the floor into your living room where your family is sitting, or into a kitchen or something like that, or even out a window into the street to shoot a passerby. So you want to identify a safe direction. Usually it's a wall that has cinder block, brick, or something like that, or something that maybe backs to a bunch of trees, somewhere that it will, like you said, do the least harm, because we want to know our target and what is beyond it. Right. So not just this is the target. And even if you're engaged in an incident where you may have to pull your firearm out, where am I pulling it? Because we never want to shoot into a crowd. As you mentioned earlier, the incident with former President Trump, where one person was killed and 2 were injured. He was the intended target, but behind him were people.
Yeah.
That unfortunately, these innocent bystanders, they were harmed.
Yeah.
1 fatally and 2 injured. And so that's why it's important for us to know our target and what is beyond it. If there's an intruder in your home and you have to pull out your firearm, and the intruder is facing you, but their back is to your family room and your whole family is in that room.
Right.
You don't want to shoot, because the bullet will go through 9 times out of 10 through that person's flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And into something else. And so it doesn't stop until it hits something to stop it.
Yeah.
Depending on what type of bullet it is. And I don't want to get into all those details,
Right,
but so that's something that you have to think about. You have to be aware, know your target and what's beyond it, right? Remember the other safety rule, keep your finger off the trigger, right? Don't point your firearm at anything that you're not willing to destroy, so remembering that if I point it at my hand, a bullet could go, it could go off, a bullet could go through my hand. Right.
Mhm.
So those are things that we want to talk about, that I talk about often in my class. And I try to, as a matter of fact, we go over the safety rules over and over and over again. And as you recall, when we get to the range, I won't let you shoot until you're able to tell me those safety rules. I tell everybody it's a test. If you
Yeah.
don't pass, you fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's period. It's pass or fail. And you have to know them. And another thing that I do in my classes, if you recall, is to ensure proper handling. Remember, I tell all my students when they're picking up the firearm, they have to say, I'm picking up the firearm with my dominant hand, finger high and off the trigger, pointed in a safe direction. Because we know from learning that when you say something and you do something, it reinforces it in your brain. And then you develop that muscle memory. So that's why we say, every time I'm picking up the firearm with my dominant hand, fingers high and off the trigger, and it's pointed in a safe direction. You're telling yourself each and every time. So then it becomes muscle memory, because what we found in law enforcement and just statistics is many people are injured because of accidental discharge, whether it be
Mhm.
fatally or not, because of accidental discharge. How does an accidental discharge happen? Where they accidentally put their finger on the trigger and pull the trigger, and they didn't intend to. And as you recall, it's a really light trigger
Yeah.
press. It doesn't require much effort to pull the trigger and a round to go off. And
Mm.
so just the slightest little bit could cause an accidental discharge or an unintended discharge, and it could kill someone. So we
And
always want to keep our finger off the trigger.
yeah, I remember also this was another thing that you were really, really diligent about, is making sure that the firearm is not loaded or is
Absolutely.
loaded. You needed to know what the load condition of the firearm that you were picking up was once you picked
Absolutely.
it up.
Absolutely. Every time you need to check it. Another safety rule. You need to check it every single time. You need to treat all firearms as if they're loaded. Even if remember in my class, every time I handled a firearm, I said, listen, look, check. Is it safe and empty? Is it safe and empty? You have to check yourself. Is it safe and empty? Right? When we're on the range after shooting, is it safe and empty? How do you unload it? Drop the magazine. You want to check and then double check. Remember, I taught you. You look over your shoulder. You check one time, you look down the barrel, you check the magazine, and then you look over your shoulder and you look again, because sometimes our eyes will play tricks on us. And we've gone through the motions and we think it's unloaded, but there may be one round that's still left in the barrel,
Mhm.
right?
I did want to ask you something, because we were just talking about this incident on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, and all of the talk about
Mhm.
how far this person was. You've handled all kinds of firearms. You've
Mhm.
handled handguns, long guns, hunting rifles, automatic weapons, the
Mhm.
whole bit.
Shotguns, you name it.
Right.
Mhm.
And the discussion was that this shooter was 150 yards from where the podium was. And a lot of people say, well, that's a long way. But really, 150 yards is not far when it comes to shoot. People hunt.
Right. Well, long guns, absolutely.
Yeah,
So that's what long guns, rifles, right,
yeah.
are made for distance shooting, hunting, in military, to be able to hit targets that are far away. That's the purpose of them, right? And then, you have the depending on what kind of what's the word I'm looking for, accessories that you
Mhm.
use, you can add accessories to even aid in that. Well,
Rangefinder
right,
scopes.
right, scopes, optics, things like that, to help you find the target and pick up your target easily, and so on and so forth. But rifles are made for distance shooting, so 150 yards is really not that far away. And even with a handgun, you have to think about the trajectory of the bullet, how the velocity, how fast the bullet is coming out of the barrel. There's a lot of science that goes into it. But
Mhm.
again, which is why we go back to safety, knowing your target and what's beyond it, because you can shoot at, let's say, I don't know, we're shooting at a tree that's 25 yards in front of us, but you miss that tree, the bullet is going to keep traveling.
It's going to keep
Until
going.
it's
Yeah.
gonna keep going until it either hits something that stops it or till it eventually just drops down because of, what you call that word?
Gravity. Yes.
Gravity, exactly. So, but taking all of that into consideration, so as far as the incident and it really wasn't that far, and the shooter, the gunman knew where to take up his post so that he could shoot the intended target.
Yeah. Um, I let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that someone passes your class
Mhm,
and they pass the classroom version.
mhm.
When you take them to the gun range, what if, for someone who's never been to a gun range, indoor or outdoor, what should they expect when they walk in with their firearm and they want to do target shooting?
Shooting. Okay, so, um, first, um, you have to have the proper gear, right? So the equipment, right? Eye protection and ear protection. It's very, really, really important. And before I take my students to the range, I talk about what to expect. All right. I talk about the gunpowder or residue on your hands, right?
Mm,
Because it's going to come on your hands. And so when you wash your hands, you want to wash your hands. It's immediately after we leave the range with cold water, right? Because hot water opens up your pores, and so lead can get into your pores. So you want to
wow.
wash your hands with cold water to keep your pores closed, right? And you want to wash thoroughly. I also tell people to if they plan on eating, wash around your mouth, wash your face, at least around your mouth, wipe around your mouth because the gunpowder gets around your mouth.
But that's afterwards. But when you
But
get
that's
there,
after. But I tell them this going into it, right? So
oh, I
that they
see.
know, right? I tell them going into it. I tell them that you need proper eye protection and ear protection because it's loud, right? The round or the casing that comes out of the firearm after you shoot it, they pop back at you sometimes, depending on, and so it can hit you in your eye and take your eye out, right? And I let them know that we call it brass, is hot when it comes
Mhm.
out of the firearm, right? Because of the powder that's in it, it causes a small fire and it makes it hot. So that's what builds up the gas to cause the bullet to push out. It makes that casing hot. So when it pops back at you, it can burn you. I've been burned. I've had a casing go over my eye protection and sit on my eyelid.
Wow.
And I warn people about that because if a casing is popping back at you and you're shooting, it's going to cause you to flinch or jump. You have to maintain muzzle control. Where is the muzzle of your firearm? And I literally had it sitting on my eye and I'm like, with my firearm pointing out still because I have to be safe. And then I'm trying to get the casing off my eye. So I forewarn people that the brass is going to be hot. You should expect
Mhm.
that if it pops back at you. I ask my students to all bring a baseball cap to prevent the brass from hitting them in the forehead and in the head and things like that as a protection. I tell them that I suggest that they may want to wear long sleeves because if the brass hits them on their arms, I'm trying to
Understandable.
prevent that fear and the flinch that may cause them to turn the firearm sideways if their finger by accident is still on the trigger, even though after each shot I tell them take your finger off the trigger. And I constantly remind people, if you remember, finger off the trigger, finger off the trigger. If I have to tell you more than twice, I'm going to take the gun from you.
Mhm.
We need to reset. But so I prepare them for all of that. And then I talked about how loud it is. It's going to be loud. It's going to startle you. We use double ear protection. So we use foam ears on the inside and then we use muffs on the outside to help protect to buffer some of the loudness. But also I'm trying to save your hearing because that exposure to those loud decibels over periods of time will cause your hearing to suffer. I'm suffering hearing loss because
Mhm.
I've been shooting for so long. So those are the things that I prepare them for, and I let them know what we're going to do on the lane. I'm going to give instruction. I'll be right there. I try to prepare my students for the distance between, how far the target is away from them and what is customary. Most incidents happen in close quarters. Right?
Mhm.
So what do you need? How do you need to shoot? Am I freezing? Um, So those are the things that we talk about going into the range, and that there's other people that are going to be there shooting as well. And so again, you need to be prepared because their rounds may be flying at you. And then you also need to be prepared because everybody doesn't have the same safety training that you have.
Yeah.
So you need to have, my eyes are constantly looking around because I want to see if the person on the lane next to me is lasering me, which is again how I got into this business, because I saw people and I'm like, whoa, hold on, not safe. You're lasering me. Now at the range, they do have range safety
Instructors
officers.
and yeah,
Right,
officers.
they
Yeah.
have safety officers that are there, but they don't catch everything. It may be one or two people for 15 shooters. So you have to be your own safety officer. And I teach my students that every one of us is a safety officer. If you see something unsafe, you need to call it. See something, say something.
Yeah. So let's talk about um, the selection of a firearm. If after you've taken a course, you have your HQL, you're qualified,
Mhm.
and you decide that you do want to purchase a firearm. How do you select a firearm? Where do you go? What happens at a gun show, for example? We hear a lot of talk about gun shows where people can not only see firearms but purchase them.
Mhm. So I will say, purchasing a firearm is like selecting a partner in life, right?
Really?
I make this joke in my class all the time, and it may be of poor taste, but I say, you don't necessarily marry the first person that you date. You don't necessarily want to buy the first gun that you hold. You want to try them out. You want to see what feels good in your hand. You want to see what you can handle, right? Some guns are heavier than others, some are larger than others. And then depending on what you're going to use it for. So as I was stating earlier, I offer two different licenses: HQL, which is to purchase and own a firearm, and conceal carry weapons permit, which is to carry a firearm on your person. If you're just going to get your HQL, then it's okay to own a larger firearm, right? Maybe something that's full size, because it's being stored in your home. You're only pulling it out when you're going to the range to train. And God forbid if there's an incident, a critical incident that happens in your home. So a full size is going to be heavier. However, I educate my students that a heavier firearm, most times it absorbs some of the recoil. What is the recoil? When you shoot a firearm and the gas builds up inside of the casing of and shoots the bullet out, um, that force causes the gun to move, right? So it'll go up a little bit and it'll reset. As people, we have to manage that. The recoil can come through our bodies, which is why we have to have the right hand positioning, the right posture when we're shooting. But additionally, the gun will absorb some of that recoil. So people think, oh, small guns are so cute and this, that, and the other. Well, it's a smaller gun, so it doesn't absorb the recoil. So it's a little bit harder to manage. So you have to really work to manage that gun, because when it goes off, it can do all of this. So, you see in the movies and it's like, woo,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. That's the recoil. So I tell my students that want just an HQL, and they know that, listen, I don't want to carry a gun on me all the time. I just want to have something in my house to protect myself. I often show them, and I have several firearms in my arsenal, for lack of a better word. And I will let them try the various firearms I have. But then I also encourage them, before you commit to buying something, go to the range and rent and shoot those guns. And that's a service that I also offer to my students. I'll take them to the range, and at certain ranges, for like a nominal fee of $50 or so, you can rent 4 different weapons. And you can
Hmm.
try out 4 different weapons. I always suggest that they do the same caliber, meaning the same bullet size, 9 millimeter or 40 or 45, whatever they think they're going to use. I typically don't encourage anyone to purchase a firearm that's anything smaller than a 9 millimeter. So I'm not a fan of 22s. Some people are of that school, like, oh, we start smaller and it's easier to manage a 22. It's easier to hold it and then you build up. I'm of the thought that you're going to learn how to use whatever I give you.
Mhm.
So if I give you my kids, I trained them on a 40 because that's what I had, you know. And a 40 caliber has a little bit, it's more power behind it. So that's what I taught them on because that's what I had. So that's what they learned how to use. So I always suggest to my students to start off at a 9 millimeter at the minimum. And then when we're renting firearms, it will be various firearms in a 9 millimeter, right? So you can get one box of ammunition, shoot 10 rounds or so, and see how it feels. What
Mhm.
feels good to you, right?
Mhm.
How does it feel when you pull the trigger? Can you manage the recoil? How's it sit in your hand? Because people, different size hands. Some people think, oh, I have small hands, I need a small gun. Not necessarily. You can still get a full size that just has a smaller grip. So we go through all of that process. And then you want to think about, again, how do I live? Right? Where am I going to store this firearm? That's something to consider. What kind of lockbox am I going to store it in? When you're buying something, some people think I want something that's big and it's going to stop people. I have a friend whose mom and dad are not elderly. I don't want to say that, but they're in their late 60s, and they went out without me to purchase a gun because they were so afraid it was COVID, and the gun store owner sold them a 45
Oh my, yeah,
caliber. Uh, the kind of gun doesn't really matter, but it was a very heavy gun for
yeah,
old people. That's not a good look. And so then when I took them to the range, it was like, this is too heavy. My hand is getting tired. And so because it wasn't the right gun for them.
yeah.
Like, and you have to take those things into consideration. What is your dexterity? You have older people. My mom, she is a responsible firearms owner, and we purchased her the firearm that was going to be the best fit for her. She's a
Let me
real
ask you because I'm running out of time.
okay, go
Real
ahead.
quick, what happens when you go to a gun show? Real quick, what?
Right. So when you go to a gun show, right? Again, you want the same mentality, right? But what you're going to have in a gun show is you're going to have a greater array of firearms, and more people are trying to sell them to you, right? And so you have to take into consideration. I say do your homework before you go to the show, so you have an idea of what you're looking for, and you can get your hand, you can test them, but don't commit to buying anything unless you've already tried it, you've already done your research, and you're like, okay, now this does feel good. This is what I want. But you're going to have exposure to a greater array. But again, there's more people that's trying to sell you on a firearm, and they're trying to sell you what they have. You also have to be aware at gun shows whether it's if you're purchasing something that's a historic firearm,
Antique or something?
an
Yeah.
antique that needs to be registered or don't need to be registered, right? And then where you are, what are the laws for your state? In Maryland, you still have to have that firearm transferred to you. And there's a fee for having it transferred. There's a form that has to be filled out, and there's a waiting period that has to take place of 7 days so that Maryland State Police can do a background investigation on you to make sure that you can have this firearm. Even though you had the background investigation done when you got your HQL, they still have to recheck to make sure that there wasn't anything that has happened in the interim between when your last investigation and now purchasing this new firearm.
And
So what
real quick,
happened?
because I only have a minute left, but this is
Okay.
really important. We know that recreational marijuana is legal in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. We know that drugs and guns do not mix, but more importantly, as we've seen in the news, uh, how can you own a firearm if you are a recreational marijuana user?
So right now, no. Even though you can be legally recreational, you can purchase recreational marijuana, but right now you cannot own a firearm and have a medical marijuana card. Right?
Okay,
At this time in Maryland, you cannot. I don't know what's going to happen in the
obviously, yeah.
future, but at this time in Maryland, you cannot own a firearm and have a medical marijuana card. If you have a medical marijuana card and you want to get your HQL or your concealed carry, you have to surrender your card for 1 year. And after 1 year and a day, then you can apply for your HQL and so on and so forth.
Real quick, what's your website? Because I'm going to be posting it
Yeah.
on our Take Back Our Community Thursday site on WHUR.com.
Right.
Real quick.
So, okay, so my company is called Every Second Counts, Firearms Training. You can find me on Instagram at Every Second Counts Firearms Training. My website is Kiana. You told me to have it ready, and I'm sorry.
I
It
did.
is. I know
I'll
you did. I
post
know
it.
you
I
did.
gotta go. I'll
Okay,
find
good.
it.
Thank you.
I'll
Yeah, I'll
post
give it
it.
to you so you can post it, please. But the best way to find me is on Instagram, and I'm still Coach Kiana.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm out here, and you can find me.
Thank you, Kiana
Thank you
Roberts.
so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, July 18th, for this Take Back Our Community Thursday, TBOC on WHUR.com. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.